So yeah, welcome, Amanda. Thanks for taking your time out today. So it'd be good if we could just have a start with your journey through the care sector, effectively, and what's brought you to kind of where you are currently.
Well, good morning, Josh. I've had a really eclectic career, actually. I think I'm not typical of most people who are working in healthcare consultancy today. So I started very young at the age of 18 and I qualified as a nurse. But I knew from day one that that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I finished my training and I retrained and worked as a journalist and worked in marketing for a number of years. So after I had my family, things changed a lot. I went back into just general nursing because there was a recession in the early 90s and I'd been working as a freelance journalist. I was never being paid and times were hard and the interest rates were really, really high. So I then, I went back into nursing, lived in France for a few years and just had a long and windy journey, really, until I would say I stumbled upon care homes, the care home sector, when I was working up in North Wales. So I had a nighttime job working in a boarding school, looking after boarders, and a daytime job. I went into my first care home that looked after people with dementia. And that's where I really got the bug. I looked at the home I was working in and I thought, you know what, I'm not sure we're doing the right thing by these people. And eventually I was lucky enough to end up in management in a variety of care homes, received a lot of training. I initially set myself up as a dementia specialist as a trainer. So I was training the local authority, but in the NHS. So that was really interesting. Um, and just along the way, I've become a registered manager in several care homes. Usually, when I went into care homes, they were care homes that were in trouble. A lot of care homes are quite non-compliant with the legislation, and usually you're brought in a panic, and they want the home turned around. So I was very lucky in one of the homes that I worked in a couple of years ago that I took over from a fabulous lady who was a consultant. She'd been brought in temporarily to sort things out. And she said to me, "Well, why don't you be a consultant?" And it had never been on my radar. It never dawned on me that all of this very eclectic experience that I had
Yeah.
could lead to me having, a lot of skills and experience that would enable me to be a pretty well-rounded consultant. And so that's what I decided to do, and it's been hugely successful so far. I've had barely time to think. Um, and what happened initially was I went, my first home, which was I went into was in a degree of trouble with, lots of safeguardings. They were inspecting measures. It was a very large home. So, and nobody in the home really understood what you needed to do in that situation. And I was able to pull together a really robust action plan, deal with all the authorities that needed to be dealt with, and it went from there really.
Okay, amazing. And obviously, you're looking to kind of set up your own agency dealing with consultants, which is awesome, which we'll touch on a bit later. But obviously, the positive impact that you've had being a consultant within these care homes, you can read on the news or you see on social medias, there's a real negative talk around care homes and the kind of work they're doing at the moment. Being in and around those homes, what's your thoughts on kind of where homes are at the moment and what they kind of need to do to turn around the bad press, I guess?
I think, there's a lot of factors at play. Inherently, it depends on the ownership, really who owns these homes, what the ownership structure is. So you can have anything from a one person band, right through to mega conglomerates, where they've got 150, 350 homes, you know.
Yeah.
And I have worked for all different types of ownership. And what I'm in the lucky position now is that I work with owners that I know will work with me. Um, I'm very careful now to work with people who have the same kind of ethos. That yes, number one, this is a business and we need to make money, but ultimately, this is a people business, and it's a very
Yeah.
different thing to running, a shop, that type of thing. It's a very, very different business. So I think that we receive bad press in much the same way as the NHS does, because having been a journalist as well in the past, I know. I'll give you an example. So there was a very, very interesting documentary done some years ago, and I won't say who by, but they decided that they were going to look at somebody who does a similar job to me going in and the difference they can make in a home. So they filmed two homes. They filmed the bad home, if you like, and the good home that the specialists have been in. But the way that they filmed the bad home were first of all, they went into a much higher needs home. So, there were residents who were shouting. They filmed it all in black and white for extra dramatic effects. And they found the one person in the home that you will always get who was constantly shouting for help. And they made it look terrible. The next home they went to, much lower needs, elderly lady putting a cherry on top of a cake, all very nicey. Filmed in colour, filmed on a day when they had, entertainers coming in. So, the media can present a
Yes.
negative aspect. And of course, your average Daily Mail reader reads all the shock, horror, scandal. And if you compare what's written in there with what perhaps the BBC are writing about the same subject, tabloids today, the press is very good at using emotive language. And of course, don't get me wrong, there are some, difficult situations in care homes. There will be things that go wrong. There will be families using secret cameras, and catching terrible things that are happening. And I'm not, of course, condoning that. However, what, nobody's really interested in, what nobody's really interested in the public is what the social care sector even is. I don't think they even understand. The man on the street doesn't know what social care is. They understand the NHS. So politicians, for example, will hone in on giving more money to the NHS. They'll visit the hospital wards. They'll never visit the care homes, for example. Because we all use and we all understand the NHS and what that is. It's a national institution. But social care, if you said to people, do you know what a micro provider is? Do you understand, what is the social care sector? Do you understand how the social care sector is funded? The vast majority of the people on the street, they won't understand that sector at all. So what they will then be fed is this diet of, terrible stories or autopsies when things go wrong, because it's not that interesting. It's not that glamorous. It doesn't sell news. So I think that is the issue. I mean, how the social care sector is at the moment, to go back to your question, I think it's underfunded. Obviously, that goes without saying, that it's seriously underfunded. In one local authority that I won't name, that I'm working at the moment, the uplift in April that we received for residents' fees was only 4%. I do know of some areas where it's 2%. Well, if you look at how much utilities have gone up, how much food's gone
Yeah.
up, the new national minimum wage that we're having to, now pay out. So the costs have gone up. The costs of keeping often these big old businesses, staff, etc., it's all gone up. So the profits are being squeezed. So if you go back to the 80s and the 90s, running a care home, the care home sector, it was a real cash cow. You could make some serious money. On top of the fact that, for the owners, the profitability is being squeezed, you then have, increased legislation, in my opinion. Although legislation hasn't increased as such, what has happened is certainly since COVID, the regulators were, unable to come into the care homes, weren't they? And then they subsequently were accused of taking their eye off the ball. So since they've been coming in, I have noticed a marked shift in their attitude from collaborative, which I would say it was previously, to very punitive. We have had, CQC have just brought out a new change in the way that they've got a new inspection framework, which is not great from what I understand from my colleagues who've already been inspected under the framework. For example, it's extremely difficult to get an outstanding rating. I think outstanding ratings used to only be possible for 4% of care homes anyway. It's probably gone down to under 1%. So they're saying now, I know there've already been some initial challenges to CQC over, what is happening. A lot of evidence is expected to be presented through their portal online, so there's less visibility of them actually in the homes. So I think if you are an owner, if you are this one person band, particularly these days, you've got the increased costs, you have got this increased scrutiny and likelihood that you're going to be downgraded from your good ratings down to inadequate or requires improvement. So I think it's very tough, and certainly the local authority that I've most recently been working in, they have told me off the record that they are expecting some 10% of care homes to not survive this latest round of changes, and 10% is absolutely massive. On top of that, a few years ago, I was working in Wales under CIW, and there was a huge change, a huge emphasis change around ensuring that people are given the right to be cared for where they would like to be cared for. And of course, the vast majority of people are going to say at home. So what we saw in Wales was a significant number of residential lower level care need homes closing on the back of that, a significant number, whilst everybody was shipped back to their own homes to be looked after with care in the community type scenarios. And we're starting to see even more of that in the UK. So and I think that is fantastic, and I think that's really interesting, because we're now starting to see the rise of things such as, micro providers in Somerset, for example. I know a fair bit about that, where individual carers or nurses are encouraged to align themselves with the local authority and to pick their own people they're going to look after and set up their own contracts. And it's all done outside of the regulator. The local authority regulates to some extent, but it's done outside of CQC. So that's really interesting. And of course, that is also taking your best carers who would ordinarily work in care homes, for example, out into the community, because they can earn a lot more money and they can have the autonomy of running their own business. So on top of all of this, it's a very complex story, really. We have the effects of Brexit, of course, which have been catastrophic. And now the latest problem that I think that we are all facing is some significant issues with the way that we are with the sponsorships within the home. So because the Home Office have recognised that they made a few mistakes, they gave a few licenses, I believe, to homes that didn't exist. Um, they have tightened up significantly with homes in terms of either appearing to give the sponsorship license. That's my opinion anyway, with what I've
Yeah.
seen there. And also in renewing or giving additional licenses. And this is causing major problems in the care sector. It's probably one of the biggest challenges we're facing. So after Brexit, after we lost a lot of Eastern European staff, we started to rely on people from places such as Africa, such as India, coming over to the UK on a visa via a sponsorship scheme. Now, what happened was most employers took people. You could take people on a 3-year or a 5-year sponsorship scheme, and most people took them on the 3-year scheme to see how things would turn out, thinking we'll go back to the Home Office and we'll reapply if they're okay for the last 2 years. So they've all got to that stage 3 years later en masse, and the Home Office is either not giving these additional visas because I think it's possibly the way that they're dealing with the immigration issues in the UK by stealth. That's my personal opinion. Or they're just incredibly slow. The Home Office are incredibly slow at responding to the needs of these homes. So in lots of places, it's very dependent on where you're working. So, in lots of places there are, staff who are readily available and you can fill your home no problem. But if you happen to be, I'll give you an example, a home in the middle of nowhere, not on any bus routes, but you're able to offer accommodation to overseas, you've relied very heavily on the overseas workers coming. And now all of a sudden, these people who you've invested in and who have invested and made their lives in our country, because you can't get the Home Office visas fast enough, they are having to go back, and you have lost. The care homes are losing that very skilled workforce at the moment.
And I've always found with the sponsorships as well, where they can be on a 3 or 5 year, you're building teams with consistency. Where previously you've seen homes having to go to agency, high cost agencies, and every week they've got different staff, which actually impacts the individuals within the homes that actually thrive off having that continuity.
Yeah.
What impact have you seen with obviously these skilled workers that had to leave? Have you seen the impact or a rise in services that you've been involved in, a rise in agency use, or have they decided, has it been more the opposite and actually working more on a skeleton team kind of scenario?
I think because of the pressure of the increase in costs, then agency has always been or should be used as a last case resort.
Yeah.
I think a lot of homes will work with agencies if they want to use them on a regular basis to get the costs down, but use that person regularly, which also
Hmm.
gets over the fact that, you what you don't want is half of your workforce coming in every day who've never worked in the home, who don't know the people who are in the home and don't know how to look after them. It's almost worse than not having anyone at all, really, because they can be a bit of a liability. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've worked with lots of really fantastic agency workers as well. So in terms of agency businesses, I have certainly seen a big decline in people setting up agencies. That is because the homes are working. Once the homes woke up to the fact that you could get a sponsorship license and bring, for example, most of the people that I've been able to bring in from India, they will be qualified nurses in India, and
Yes, they're very skilled.
you're bringing them very highly skilled, and you're
Yeah.
bringing them over to work as carers. So you are getting a very high skill level, you're getting a very robust work ethic. People from overseas are well aware of the opportunities that they have in the UK. So as I say, I see the major problem being around the Home Office, and I am planning to do some significant lobbying myself, because my recruitment business that I'm setting up, does also focus on bringing in overseas workers for the healthcare sector. And yeah.
Yeah, no, amazing. And if we touch back on, we spoke about the social care sector and the NHS, and obviously there needs to be a real tight collaboration between these two companies effectively to kind of work better, especially, discharge teams, care homes. Where has that broken down over recent years, and kind of, I guess, what can be done to kind of tighten that partnership back up again?
What ultimately needs to be done is we need to have joint budgets, and that has been happening in certain experimental ways. But you have fights between the NHS budget holders, the purse string holders, and the local authority all the time over who should be paying. You see it particularly in nursing homes when there's an element of local authority funding, an element of NHS funding. And it is really, really difficult. Whereas if there was one pot of money that everything had to come out of, I think it would be easier. But that's a very idealistic view. Everybody's budgets have been tightened.
Yeah,
All local authorities are, trying. Every time you go to a local authority now and you say, this is going to be the cost of care for a client, there is almost always a battle. Sometimes it's just playing lip service. So I had, that's more than we wanted to pay. Can you do anything about it? And you'll say, no, sorry. And they'll say, oh, okay then. Sometimes when it's almost always when it's over a certain amount now, it has to go off to the funding panel, which again, if you're the only home who's offering a bed to somebody and they need a bed, 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. But there is this real problem between the funders when it's public funding and the requirements of the care homes to stay sustainable, to stay in business, because the owners want to be making enough money for the huge hassles that you go through to run one of these business to
yeah,
make it worthwhile. This is not you set up an internet business or you sell something on eBay and you get a customer and you send something off. This is highly complex, highly regulated, very difficult, multifaceted business that we're working in. So yeah, it's hard.
no, 100%. Yeah, we see it weekly. Speaking with registered managers, the last chap I spoke to was a guy called Steve, and he's a regional director at Avery Healthcare, and
Yeah.
everyone's kind of experienced in the same things. You talk about kind of ownership of care homes, and obviously, does there need to be tighter regulations around who can actually start or open a care home? And what if there was, or what should that look like?
I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because, the vast majority of the directors will absolve themselves of the ultimate responsibility by paying somebody to be the nominated individual who will take most of the legal rap
Yeah,
should things go wrong. I personally think there needs to be some sort of, because, apart from the fact that if you're setting up a company and you're a director, you need to follow criteria to become a director, i.e. you've not been declared bankrupt, you need
yeah,
to be a person of good moral character, etc.
yeah,
There doesn't seem to be any other hoops that the directors really jump through. And you have you have the completely hands-off directors who are there in name only, And you have directors who've never even visited the homes that they own. That's incredibly common, right through to the other end where you have, people who are super hands-on, but don't their background is usually very much more in the finances. So they're approaching the business purely one-dimensionally from a financial perspective. So yeah, I absolutely think that there should be um, more hoops that these directors need to jump through, because when I look on, so I'm on quite a lot of support groups. I'm involved in a lot of support groups for people in management in the care home sector. And, I am seeing 9 out of 10 posts and things now on Facebook support groups, for example, where people are just throwing in the towel. They've had enough. They're not being respected for their knowledge. They're not being supported. They're not being paid appropriately, and so on. And often, they'll be advised by their colleagues to leave and find a decent director. And
Yeah,
for me, finding the decent directors is the holy grail in all of this. And, I've been very lucky, as I said, since becoming a consultant, to be able to choose people whose ethos and aligns with mine. And
yeah,
that has been quite a revelation, having, previously worked with, less, shall we say, less alignment, shall we say, in
yeah.
really.
Yeah, no, 100%. Especially, you think these care homes are dealing with some of the most vulnerable people in society.
Yeah.
And, just because, I don't know, a chap or a lady down the road have a bit of surplus cash they've got available, just to open up a care home without any experience within that space, what these vulnerabilities really mean and the impact it can have on families and, the wider community, to me seems madness that there's no tighter kind of restrictions around who can do that and actually what you need to be able to prove to be able to kind of open your door, especially as you said, you can bring in a registered manager, a nominated individual, and you kind of keeping yourself very pushed back from the overall, the quality and how the home is run. But for me, anyone who's an owner or a director within a business, needs to be at the forefront of what it's all about. And, you create the culture, the environment, and this is who we're going to be known as, and this is what we're going to do. So, for me, I think there definitely needs to be more work around who can and who can't be in charge of that sort of operation.
I think my preferred business model, if you have a financial director or directors, is to involve, if you have got a really good registered manager, is to make them the care director and give them a
Yeah,
share of the profits, because you then tend to find that your business efficiencies increase tremendously once the manager starts to understand that, but also your directors start to have that on level conversations with the person who is the expert in their field, and therefore you create this nucleus of people who you have that higher level management structure, higher level management team, and I think it would be very good if all directors had to at least have some sort of advisory level person. I know that we have the nominated individual, but again, the nominated individual is often the same person as the registered manager, although that isn't really liked by the regulator, and you can see
yeah,
why,
yeah,
because
no, for sure.
it's that governance level that then doesn't exist. Um, we also need to look at registered managers who have often come up through the ranks. Perhaps they have started as a carer, they've come up through the ranks, or they've started as a nurse, and so their business acumen is likely to be limited. They're going to have the social care, the healthcare knowledge is going to be there, but the business acumen is very often not there. So I think, that we need to be approaching how we lead the care home sector by having, the financial based directors who understand a lot more about care and people management, and vice versa, where you have the healthcare manager understanding a lot more about business, finance, running a budget, all of those things. Because if you run your home efficiently and you allow your care manager, if you like, to be an integrated part of that, then you have happy bunnies working for that
No.
and running that organization. And then you also have the skills that are needed to make it successful, to be able to run the home in ways that are needed for sustainability, because the bottom line is that it is a business. And if we're not creating a sustainable model, and it's things like, I'll give you an example. So, I will go into homes, and the registered manager and the directors will just accept what they've been told about the fee uplifts, for example, in April. And, that's a really, really big mistake. Because if your business is costing you an 11% increase, your local authority, I saw one local authority letter that said, our fee increase is 2% this year, and this is our final decision. Well, no, you can challenge it, because what you can say is, well, that's your base rate. However, this person that I'm looking after here requires, 20 hours of individualized care. All you're paying me for is their bed and their board and some very basic care. You're not looking at the individuals. So, you do need, this is where I'm saying that the managers have to have this business acumen, or somebody in that position where they can fight back, because the directors can't, because if they're non-care directors, they won't understand this. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, amazing. And yeah, there's definitely work to be done. I guess kind of we'll wrap it up shortly, but I guess I don't have the figures in front of me, but there's reports all the time about registered managers leaving, home managers leaving, looking for different, being burnt out. How can I guess what what can we do to get them back in, or what can we do to kind of make sure that moving forward this doesn't happen? So the new kind of home managers coming through aren't in that same position in 2 or 3 years' time, that they just got nothing left to give, and their only option is to look for alternative employment.
I think, for me, it's two things. It's about how they are treated by the directors, and it's how the regulators are operating at the moment. I think the regulators need to take a good, long, hard look at themselves, and that is any public sector regulator at the moment. Because look at the situation of the headmistress who took her own life recently
Yes.
of the inspection. Well, I can tell you, that is the at the back of your mind as a home manager every day you go to work is, God, are the inspectors going to come in today? What are they going to find? And that as soon as they come in, as soon as they find something, as soon as they downgrade slightly, the directors, looking for somebody to blame, will blame the home manager. And then, the home manager will be in trouble, out on their ear or whatever. So it's a very, very, it feels like a gamble these days being a home manager. It doesn't feel like it's a stable, secure job, certainly in the smaller homes, and that, you are often you can often be the scapegoat. So as far as I'm concerned, work needs to be done with the regulator, and it needs to be a lot more collaborative, and it needs to be a lot more, they don't seem to like giving advice anymore. They sit on the fence, and it's that sort of thing, really, because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want
Yes, 100%.
safe and happy care homes, don't we? That's what they want. And I think, they need to ease off. They need to ease off the pedal. They need to sort themselves out in terms of their organization, because it seems to be very chaotic at the moment. There seems to be a lack of structure, people unable to get on their new portals, people getting their, you get sent some paperwork called a PIR that you have to fill in prior to them coming for an inspection. And they used to come out once a year, and they're coming out all different times. They're coming out 2 or 3 times a year, and there just seems to be a lack of that they are yet another public sector organization, much like the civil service, that have not really got back to where they need to be after COVID, is my opinion. They are struggling as much as the rest of us. But I feel that we need to have hubs. I would like to see hubs set up of all key people, like CQC, like the local authority, like the registered manager, like the directors, meeting on a monthly, 6-weekly basis, just to talk about how things are going, not a once every 18 months or 2 years, when, especially now, if you know that they're coming, you bring in all your best staff, all your extra staff, you get your flowers out, yeah. So yeah, that's what I think anyway.
No, I think that's spot on. And it's just, yeah, for me, it's just about putting people back at the heart of what
Yeah,
the sector was and should be all about fundamentally. But no, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Really good talking to you.
and
So,
you,
but
James.
we'll have a quick, so when will your recruitment business be up and running? When are you,
In about a month's time. So
perfect?
that's the plan. I mean, I'm going to specialize in other consultants, such as
Yeah.
what I do, because at the moment, because there is such a lot of disarray in the care home sector. But I'm specialising in consultants such as myself that are general management consultants.
Yeah.
So they can look on the compliance care side, but they can also look at failing businesses and why the business is failing. So they're looking at restructuring, they're looking at the finances, etc. So that's certainly an area where, so I will only have a handful of key people who I know are able to do this, to provide this holistic kind of service. So I will let you know when it's up and running. And I suppose the
No,
good
please
thing for you
do.
with all this disarray is that you've got lots of people leaving, and you're able to, as a recruiter, you're able to place them elsewhere as well.
Yeah, no, there's pros and cons, but I think for us,
No.
we focus very much on the permanent side,
Oh,
and
okay.
we don't I don't go near the temp side anymore. I've spent too many years, and I just don't think it's not I think perm is better. You can build up better relationships with clients, and you can actually have some a positive long term impact. I
Yeah.
think agency temp, I think it serves a purpose. It plugs gaps in rotas which ultimately need to be filled. But I also think there needs to be some further long-term planning about recruitment and retention. But that could be a whole nother conversation about what organisations need to do for that. But maybe we'll have that conversation another day.
Yeah. Fantastic.
But no, brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, and it's been an absolute honour and pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye bye for now.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.